I came home from church and confessed to Trish that I was having an affair with her best friend.
Mm.
And I wanted to leave her and my boys, who were 9, 6, and 3 at the time, to pursue this other relationship. And it wasn't a confession of remorse or repentance. It was just a confession of resignation. And obviously, Trish left the house hysterical, and we were separated for 2 months. At that point, we didn't talk to each other for the next 10.
All right. Hey, welcome everybody to A Father's Podcast. Very excited about my guest today. Best-selling author, husband, father, just all around incredible human being. I have admittedly been stalking him on social media and the internet, but I just want to welcome Justin Davis. Justin, thank you so much for being here.
Elijah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be a guest.
Yeah, we are so glad to have you. I was mentioning to you earlier, and I think our guests will be interested to know, when I started this podcast, I really was looking for people who would resonate just with the mission, the purpose, the conversation. I think one of the things that we're missing today is just present fathers. We're missing fathers who fight. We're missing, which is just a lot that we're missing. But I said, where's one place I can get involved and make a difference? And I really feel like fatherhood is one of those places. And so I asked our dear friend ChatGPT, I said, hey, who would be a good influential person to have on the podcast? And right away, Justin Davis. So I don't know if you should be scared about that. Or
Exactly. I don't know what I've been feeding ChatGPT lately, but regardless, God used ChatGPT to bring us together. I love it.
That is so good. Well, first of all, so great to have you. I have, like I said, I've just kind of stalked you a little bit. Sounds more weird than it is, I promise. But I really wanted to get to know you, as much as I could before connecting with you, and your message of just redemption, fatherhood, your life just truly meets a standard that I don't know. It's really exciting to see and exciting to hear about. So I wanted to touch base with you this morning and just kind of tell my guests just a little bit like who is Justin Davis and what's the mission of JustinandTrisha.com.
Yeah, that's a complicated question. Yeah, so my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We just celebrated 30 years of marriage in July of 2025, which is just crazy to think about. We do have 5 kids. Our oldest son, Micah, is 29. Then we have a son named Elijah. He's 26.
Gosh, I knew I loved you guys.
Isaiah, he's 22. So we didn't necessarily set out to have the prophets as our kids, but once you name your first son Micah, you kind of have to, you can't go with Bob like the next time. Not that there's anything wrong with Bob.
No, but he's going to be messed up his whole life. Like, what the heck?
Exactly. Why didn't
Where's
you love me as much
here?
as Micah? Yeah. And then 9 years ago, my wife and I adopted our youngest 2 kids, Jalen and Janiah. They were the oldest of 5 siblings, and another family, we live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Another family here in Indianapolis adopted the younger 3. And my wife and I adopted Jalen and Janiah when they were 7 and 9. So they're getting ready. They're born on the same day, 2 years apart. And so they're getting ready to turn 18 and 16 here on December 22nd. So,
wow.
So that's kind of our family. And we live in Indianapolis. We've been here 10 years collectively. Or not collectively, in this run, we've been in Indianapolis, then we move away, then we move back, and so altogether, I think we've been in Indy 16 years. We lived in Nashville, Tennessee, for 6 years as well, and then kind of all over the Midwest before that. So that's a little bit about me.
I love Nashville. I've been to Nashville, a beautiful place, really neat place. So a couple fun facts. I noticed your wife sings. Is this true?
It is. She's retired. She stopped singing probably about 3.5 years ago. And so my oldest son leads a church, and he just asked her a few weeks ago. He's like, "Hey, if we ever got into a bind, would you sing?" And she's like, "Well, I'm retired, but you're the only person I would come out of retirement for." So
there's always need for worship leaders. I love that. 5 kids. Okay, so I have 4 kids. That's incredible. 5 kids. What What a full quiver you have. I guess we we could say that is it's a lot, right? It really is. And
Yeah,
how
and
go ahead.
I was just to say, I don't think it was a strategic move on our part. We were a year away, maybe from being. No, we were like 3 years away from being empty nesters, with our youngest biological son, and then we had a friend of ours who owns an adoption agency that just sent us a text message and said, "Hey, would you guys consider adopting these kids?" And so that was on a Thursday. Um, and I said, "Well, if we, wanted to move forward, what do you need from us?" She's like, "Well, the birth mom wants to talk to you on Monday." That was June 2nd. And then we got emergency custody of the kids June 22nd. So within a 3 week period of time, we went from never really thinking about adoption because we travel so much,
Yeah.
to, hey, these kids are moving in with us. And so I was at that point, after we decided to do it, I texted her and said, "Oh, how much is this going to cost?" And she said $36,000. I was like, "Holy crap!" And so by God's grace, we raised the money in like 4 days, through
Oh my gosh.
through like GoFundMe or whatever. Um, and so God, just really provided in that way. And yeah, so then the kids officially became ours in November of 2017.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And
Yeah.
those
So
this
I wish it was like this, grand, adoption plan that we had. It wasn't. It was just more of a, you know, being presented with a need and feeling like,
hey,
we
God
can open up
knows.
our home. Yeah. So yeah. So
Yeah, God knows. Wow. Oh, also, shameless plug here, best-selling author. Tell me a little bit about your book.
yeah. So my wife and I have written two books together. Our first book is called Beyond Ordinary, When a Good Marriage Just Isn't Good Enough. It came out in 2013 and is really just, it's a kind of a he said, she said memoir of kind of the vision that we had for our marriage 30 years ago, and then the complete implosion of our marriage 10 years into marriage, and then the restoration process that we went through, um, to have really a brand new marriage. And that book was really just kind of an overflow of our story. We never set out to be authors or speakers, and so we travel and speak and do marriage conferences at churches all over the country. We've done that since really 2010.
Oh,
um, and so that's our first book. And then I think the book that you're referencing, that was a USA Today bestseller, came out in 2023, called "Being Real is Greater Than Being Perfect: How Transparency Leads to Transformation." And really, the idea of that book is most of us have a desire to change, but we settle for behavior modification because we're not honest with ourselves, with God, and with others. And so the key to heart transformation and long-term change is not pretending, but really in admitting that we don't have it together, and that we need, God's grace and God's presence to bring transformation to us. And then in March of 2025, my wife and I released our newest book, called One Choice Away from Change. And the subtitle of that is Break the Cycles That Hurt Your Relationships and Hold You Back. And that book really is kind of, people ask me all the time, "What's your next book?" I'm like, I have nothing left to say, because that book really is kind of a culmination of the last 15 years of working with individuals. And my wife does life coaching for women, and then we do marriage coaching for couples, and really just this idea that sometimes what gets us most stuck is the prevailing thought that we have to make 100 different changes to have a different life. And it's really just recognizing that you're one choice away
mm,
from, the transformation that God desires for you. And you don't have to lose 50 pounds in a day. You can have a salad for lunch,
yeah.
so.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love that. I feel like that just resonates too with kind of, what I'm doing here, and hearing you talk about, just that one choice. I really felt like the Lord told me, just very recently, one step at a time. It's those
Mm,
one small change leads to more change, leads to bigger change, and it's before you know it. In fact, I recently was talking to our youth group here, and we were talking to the youth, and they're getting involved on their campuses. And my wife and I used to be youth pastors, and so
okay.
we talked about how, it's kind of that old concept of, your friend gets a pet and you see the brand new pet, the little puppy, and then you come visit that friend a month later and that puppy is huge. But the friend never saw that puppy grow, because it was right in front of their eyes. They didn't see it. They
Right.
weren't able to acknowledge it. And so I just, as encouragement, those day by day, the change is happening. You just need to
Hmm.
keep moving forward. And I think that's incredible. I do have a desire to write a book someday, so I'm going to keep your contact information. We'll see.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I've probably said too much, as my wife will probably attest, but it is what it is. So,
Well, hey, there's a great conference that's going to be free. I think it's in January called the Ink Writers Conference.
okay.
You can Google it, and
Like
depending on when this
INC or INK?
INK,
Okay.
INK, and myself, and I think there's like 60 Christian authors that are a part of it. It's a free conference. So if any of your listeners have a
Yeah.
desire to write a book too, I think they're going to talk about traditional publishing, self publishing, everything in
Yeah.
between. So there you go.
Wow,
There's a
that's
little
incredible.
resource for you. Yeah.
Speaking of marriage conferences, do you remember the old Weekend to Remember conferences?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you been to any, or did you
I
ever speak at those?
well, were in, we were invited to speak at a Weekend to Remember probably 3 or 4 years ago. Well, it was before COVID, 5 or 6 years ago. The timing did not work out. They have not invited us back since, but we have some really good friends, Jackie and Stefana Bledsoe, that regularly they live here in Indianapolis as well, and they are huge We Can Remember speakers. I think they do 6 or 8 of them a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I highly recommend that conference if you're looking for
I
a great marriage
agree.
conference.
That conference actually changed my life, in a way, from a fatherhood standpoint. I remember sitting in a room and they separate the men and the women, and they make everybody kind of yell out one word. Yell out one word to describe your father. And
Hmm.
I sat there just kind of in silence for the moment and just listened, and the things people were saying. I mean, there were some words that I would have to beep out in this podcast. There were just a lot of negativity. I would say 95% was just negative, loser, worthless, absent. Just you're hearing this in this auditorium. And then
Wow.
through just like the faint negative, the negativity was very loud, but through just very faintly through all that, you could hear maybe one or two loving, caring, present. And in that moment, I made the decision that's the type of father I'm going to be. I said,
Wow.
when my kids come, if they ever come to this conference and someone says, give me a word to describe your father, it's going to be one of those words. It's not going to be all the other words that everybody else is yelling. And quite honestly, I probably would have yelled too. So yeah, We Can Remember was a big conference
Wow,
for
that's
me. Yeah,
powerful.
changed
Yeah,
my
that's really
life.
cool. Yeah.
So you mentioned just a little bit about your journey, and I know a lot of people want to be used by God. And I don't know if this was ever you, but a lot of people want to be used by God. But boy, we have a hard time with the process. Use me, God, use me, God, use me, God. And God says, I'm going to use you, but I have to build some things in you.
Yeah.
And that building, that refining process is rather painful.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk just real quickly about that for you. You talked a little bit about there's kind of a turning point in your marriage. Would you say that was a pivotal point in directing
Yeah.
your steps in directions into speaking and things like that, where you are today? Is that kind of the turning point for you?
Yeah, and not even from that standpoint, but just I think it was a pivotal point in my relationship with God. I mean, it just changed everything. Just I'll give you kind of a synopsis of my story. My wife and I got married. I was 21, she was 20. We were in love with each other and wanted to change the world through the local church. That was kind of the shared vision that we had together. As you mentioned, she sings, and so I could preach, she could sing. It was a match made in heaven, and so we get married the summer before my senior year of college. So we're young, in love, broke. We're college students. And then 4 months into marriage, she finds out that she's pregnant with our oldest son. And so life was coming at us really fast. We dive headfirst into student ministry, did student ministry for 7 years. And then 7 years into marriage, felt like God had laid on our heart this idea to plant a church for people who didn't go to church. And so we sold everything that we owned. We moved to the northeast side of Indianapolis, about 45 minutes from where we live now, and started a church with $5,000. And my wife found out she was pregnant with our third child about a week before we moved. And so just so much stress, right? Just, no
Yeah.
money, two little kids. We had a family that had paid 3 months rent in an apartment in the town that we were going to plant the church. And so we had all this faith, and a lot of gifts, but just not the character. We hadn't developed the character to sustain the
Mm.
ministry that we really wanted to build. Didn't know that at the time. And so, 3 years into this church plant, we, have gone from 12 people to 700 people, and we've bought land, we've raised $1 million, we've done all of these things. And so from the outside looking in, we had 3 kids, a growing church, but just my relationship with God and my relationship with
Mm.
Trish, there was so many cracks there,
Yeah.
and just dysfunctional behavior patterns. And, my life basically blew up on October 9th, 2005. I came home from church and confessed to Trish that I was having an affair with her best friend.
Mm.
And I wanted to leave her and my boys, who were 9, 6, and 3 at the time, to pursue this other relationship. And, it wasn't a confession of remorse or repentance. It was just a confession of resignation. And obviously, Trish left the house hysterical, and we were separated for 2 months. At that point, we didn't talk to each other for the next 10 days. But God used that separation really. She kicked me out of the house and packed up all of my stuff. And I moved in with a family that helped us start the church, and lived in basically this 7-year-old girl's bedroom. She moved in with her sister, and I'm in this room with, a canopy bed with pink sheets.
That's
And
humbling.
yeah, yeah. And obviously
Yeah.
I don't have a job. And so I started waiting tables at PF Chang's, and just came home one afternoon after a shift, not talking to my wife. And I just thought, man, what have I done? And so at that point, God began to break my heart for my marriage again. I started going to counseling, and 10 days into our separation, Trish called me on my cell phone. I tell people all the time, if the prodigal son's dad would have had a cell phone, this would have been a call he would have made.
Yeah.
And
I
she just
love that.
said, I hear you've been going to counseling. I said, yeah. She said, well, I'm willing to go with you. And so really
Wow.
we started going to counseling together and began to put our marriage back together. Um, I had no idea what to do. Right. And so I moved back home December the 18th of 2005. And our counselor's like, if you want your marriage to work and you want, to rebuild your life, you need to move. And so we moved across town. We moved to the other side of Indianapolis, and just started our life all over. And I started working as a headhunter, placing commercial bankers in banks, and did that for 4 years, never thinking we were ever going to go back into ministry, or even ever share our story publicly. People, obviously would know us in the community. And so we would have coffee with couples who were struggling, or we'd have people over to our house who were struggling. But then in 2009, a local church here asked if we'd share our testimony for the first time. And my wife's like, nope.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, did you just pray about it? And so we got to a place where we didn't want to speak, but we agreed to be interviewed. And so, Elijah, after that service, it was a pretty large church, but after the second service, we were at the church until about 4 PM, just talking with people, praying with people, and just realized that this wasn't our story to hold in. It was really God's redemption story to
Mm.
share. And so that's when we kind of started sharing. We started a blog called refineus.org at that time. And we did a series of blog posts called 8 Things That Destroyed Our Marriage, and just tried to use our story to help other people find healing. And that really began this journey, I guess, of writing and speaking. And that really is just an overflow. We never set out to build a platform or
Mhm.
to build a social media following. It was really just wanting to help the one couple that feels like there is no hope, And so over the last couple of years, that's transitioned from refineus.org to justinandtrisha.com, where we want to help people have healthy relationships. We feel like that's what God's kind of equipped us to do. And so it's, whether you're married, single again, God wants us to experience healthy relationships with our kids, with each other, and whatever relationships we have. And so so that's kind of the journey. It was kind of a non-traditional way of finding, just not necessarily a platform, but really just experiencing God's grace and presence. And when everybody else was walking out of the room, God's grace was walking in. And
Mm.
just the amount of people that I hurt and disappointed as a spiritual leader, and just being able to, repair some of those relationships, and not just rebuild my marriage, but have a brand new marriage. And it's shaped who we are as a family to this day.
Wow. And that, when you just said that, it literally just like pierced my heart. When everybody else was walking out of the room, God's grace was walking into the room. Justin, we're supposed to be friends, just so you know, because our stories resonate. Like, this is crazy. Just hearing your story and just God's redemption. A lot of people, they want to be where you are. They just don't want to go through what you went through to get there. And
Yeah.
so,
I was speaking at a church yesterday, and I said, how many of you, if I said, who wants to be a resilient person? Everybody would want to have resilience, right, as a part of their character. What's required to develop resilience is heartache and failure and disappointment and setbacks. And we want the outcome of the character. We don't want the process of developing the character.
yeah, I love that. I actually think I heard that clip. Did you post that? Was there a
I haven't.
post on that?
Well, maybe there might be. Somebody may have posted it and
I don't
tagged me.
know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like I saw a
Yes,
post about
there is
resilience.
there is a clip from another church
Yeah.
that I spoke at earlier this year
I
on
love that. You
online. Yep,
talked
you're
about
right.
how in order to experience that resilience, there has to be resistance and there has to be,
Yes. Yep. Yep.
yeah. So that's an incredible thing. And all the while, and this is I want to ask you, real quick. So you're going through, and first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for your honesty. As someone who has been through struggles in marriage, my wife and I have been married for 23 years. We got married at 20 and 21 as well. And we always
Okay.
tell everybody 0 out of 10 recommend. It's not that we don't recommend getting married at a young age. It's that we don't recommend getting married when you aren't equipped for what you're taking on.
Hmm.
And my son was at my wedding. And it was one of those things, we didn't want to compound like, hey, let's just get married because we're having a baby. We said, no, we need to go to marriage counseling and things like that before we get married. So we did. We went to marriage counseling, lied to our pastor who was asking us all the questions. Oh yeah, we trust each other. It created just this long, road that we had to walk, and our son was present for that. So for you, I number one, appreciate your honesty. I know that those are, we do a lot of work, right? We do therapy. We have a lot of conversations. We do a lot of work, but I don't know. I think we'd be lying if there just wasn't a slight and a small prick every time we have to even tell the story or talk about the story. And, it goes both ways. It could be, maybe we're afraid of being judged, or maybe we're just, it brings back, you can see the scar. The scar's healed, but you can still see it. And sometimes there's a little numbness in those areas. With that being said, you said you had your boys. You had 3 boys during this
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because I think there's more fathers out there right now walking through what you're talking about than will even admit it. I think there's a lot of hidden sin. I think there's a lot of just unfaithful behavior going on out there. And I think there's a lot of fathers out there who don't know, A, how to stop, B, don't know how to confess. And so what would you say, first of all, because in that moment you mentioned that it wasn't even initially, it wasn't even an apology. It wasn't any of those things. It was kind of just a resign to the fact that this is what it is. What got you to the point where you were even able to communicate that? And what advice would you give to husbands and fathers out there who are walking that road right now?
I mean, that's such a good question. And I think a lot of times the reason that men choose to live in hiddenness is not even it's not necessarily malicious. It's out of fear, because we have this belief that if that person really knew me, they wouldn't love me.
Mm.
And so what we do is we sacrifice being known on the altar of being loved. And so the problem with that is we can only be loved to the extent that we're known. And so that lack of vulnerability and that hiddenness is actually preventing us from being loved in the way that we truly desire to be loved. And that was really my story. I was sexually abused when I was a kid, by two different people, and at two different, not at the same time, at two different stages of my life, and never told anyone about it. Got to my freshman year of high school, and in Indiana, there was a kid. His name was Ryan White, and it was like the first AIDS case in the state of Indiana. He got AIDS through a blood transfusion, and so it was like huge news, and that's where AIDS really kind of was on the forefront, and it just freaked me out because I was like, what if I got AIDS from being sexually
Oh,
abused? Like that was my whole, like it made, like I got sick, like I had ulcers, worried about it, like it just consumed me. And so I finally told my mom my freshman year of high school about the abuse. She didn't believe me, and that just kind of set the trajectory of my life. Like, okay, this has to be something that's hidden. That led to pornography.
mm.
And so for the first 10 years of my marriage, I had this pornography addiction. And so we get 30 days into counseling, and the counselor's like, okay, Justin, trust is starting to be rebuilt with you and Trish. If you've left anything out, now's the time to share it. And I knew I had left things out, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I thought if she knew about that, she wouldn't love me. But I also felt like the Holy Spirit was saying, are you ever going to be a person of truth? Like, are you ever going to live in a right relationship with God? And so I told Trish, as far as the affair goes, I've told you everything, but I have more to share with you. And I told her about the sexual abuse, and I told her about the pornography. And I said, hey, if you want everything, you can divorce me. You can have everything. I have to live in a right relationship with God. And it was it was a act of grace and mercy unlike anything I'd ever experienced, because she said, now we can start over, now we can begin again, because I finally know the real you. And I wish that was the starting or the finish line. It was really just the starting line of what became like a 2-year journey, of
Mm-hmm.
finding healing from sexual abuse and finding freedom from sexual addiction.
Mm.
um, but I think, had I not shared that in that moment, looking back, God's given me he had given me several opportunities and several people in my life that I could have been honest with. And the damage would have been far less had I confessed
Yeah.
before the affair. And so, a lot, how I frame it for guys is, you can choose redemptive pain or you can choose destructive pain. And destructive pain is the process of hiddenness. It's the process of building, kind of the false self and the image. That's sparing you maybe in the moment from the pain of confession, but the pain of concealment is far greater in the long term than the pain of confession, and that's redemptive pain.
Wow. Man, I could just sit here and listen to you for like an hour and a half, dude. Just no,
Well,
it's
all it
so,
means, man, is that I failed a ton. So
you
I'm
know,
speaking from a lot of experience of doing things wrong.
but I love that because I can guarantee you this. I mean, there's men that will be listening, that are listening, that need to hear that and need to make a change. And what you said about the start of the journey, my wife and I, it very, like I said, we got young. We got married young. And I was, I had the same pornography addiction. I think for me at the time, I didn't have a relationship with the Lord at the time either. And it was just almost dismissive. You kind of know it's wrong, but you just kind of do it. I think that too many men are out there justifying their sin as it's not that bad, or it could be worse. And I don't think they understand it. It leads to worse. It leads to those areas. For me, my wife and I, when we went through a really hard time at the beginning of our marriage as well, we have a very not the same story, but similar in context. And we had a moment at church, honestly, where God just wrecked me. I mean, wrecked me, wrecked her. And we looked at each other on the way home that night, because we always tell people, if it wouldn't have been a Sunday night, we would have been at a courthouse on Monday. And so this was a Sunday night service we had gotten invited to. Long story short, God met us in that moment. We both went home looking at each other like, did anything happen to you? Did anything happen to you? And we're just, we're just like, okay. And, you think, oh, wow, we're fixed. Oh, no. No, that was just the beginning, and the work that we had to put in for that, just to be where we are today, 23 years married, 4 kids. And every day is a step towards each other. We have to take that step towards each other on a daily basis. So let me ask you this. You're going through all of this. Where were your kids in that moment? And I kind of want to ask the hard question, because you're in the middle of an affair, you're in the middle of all of these things, and your kids are still at home. Where would you say you were at as a father, and where were your kids kind of in your mind during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think my kids were 9, 6, and 3, and you justify destructive choices in order to shield yourself from the emotional carnage you're causing those that, that you love the most. And so I had convinced myself that my kids were going to be better off if I was happy, rather than if I was in a marriage that made me unhappy. At the same time, I think I wasn't necessarily an intentional father. I was a good dad. The first 10 years of our marriage, I was present, but I was also way more driven to be successful, way more driven to, be important, way more driven to have a bigger church than I was to be a good dad. I wouldn't have necessarily said that in the moment. It was only through, looking back to see how many sacrifices and really how we oriented our entire identity as a family around
Mm.
my vocation. So, my wife and I are separated. I'm sitting on the porch with my 3 boys, and we're on this porch swing at the house that I'm staying at. And I said to the kids, I said, "Hey, I just want you to know, I'm not going to be moving home for a while." And Micah, who was 9, said, "Well, are you and Mom going to get divorced?" And I said, I don't know. I said, "But one thing I can tell you is I'm not going to be the pastor of the church anymore." And he just lost it. He's like, "What? You have to be the pastor. I'm the pastor's son. Like, you have to be the pastor." And it was just this moment of clarity to recognize that we had built, our entire value system as a family, not around our relationship with the Lord, but around our relationship with the church. And
Mm.
when that was taken away, he was more upset that I wasn't going to be at the church than I wasn't going to be the husband of his mom. And
Wow.
that was really just a defining moment, I think, for us to shift, our focus as parents, as we brought restoration to our relationship. There was a lot more that needed to be deconstructed. There was a lot more than just how we relate to one another. It was more, how do we as a family, and how do I as a dad relate to God as a father? And then how do I allow my relationship with my Heavenly Father to influence how I father my kids? And not necessarily how do I orient my vocation and allow that to influence how I parent my kids. And so that was I can talk about it in 2 minutes. It was really a 2 to 3 year process of
Yeah.
unlearning a lot of unhealthy patterns that we had built into kind of the ecosystem of our home, and reassessing what does it look like to be an intentional father, to be not just present in my, as I'm sitting in the room watching Sports Center, but what does it look like to actually invest in my kids?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so important, investing in our kids, being present for them. And, let's be honest, we talked a little bit before we went on air just about your father's story. Um, just real quick, because I think this is important, and I don't know exactly what your entire upbringing looked like, but the world really just tells us. For example, I didn't really have a father figure in my life in the traditional sense of the word. I had a stepfather who was verbally and physically abusive. I had a who I thought was a biological father who divorced with my mom at 8 years old and went and married her best friend, and so I didn't have that father figure in my life. And I say that to say the world would say, well, based on your examples, you should be a pretty crappy father. This is what you were taught, right? But I chose to break the mold. I chose to do something different. I chose to give my kids something that I never had. Tell me a little bit about that for you. Would you say, what was the impact of your father?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, it's a complicated answer, because it's interesting how. So my parents got married 3 weeks after I was born, 2 weeks after. So I was born August 15th. They got married September 1st. And so I grew up with this belief that my parents got married because of me. Um, my parents had a very volatile relationship. They were not Christians when they got married. They became Christians when I was, young, like 2 or 3 years old. But they had just a really volatile relationship to where the police would be called growing up. My parents would have to be separate. I was frequently trying to separate them as a little kid. Dishes would be thrown. My dad would, hit my mom. He was very abusive verbally. And at the same time, like all I wanted to do was please him. All I wanted to do was, you know, you know, make him proud of me. He loved hunting, fishing. He loved anything outdoors, motorcycles. I didn't like any of that. And so he worked on cars, was very mechanical. He would consistently tell me, go inside with your mom. You have no idea what you're doing. And
Oh,
so there was this disconnect
yeah.
from what I felt like. But at the same time, he was the best man in my wedding. So we really found a connection my freshman year of high school when I made the basketball team. And to his credit, he became one of my biggest fans, and
Wow.
would take me to games and tournaments. And they sat. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and they would sacrifice financially for me to pursue this dream of playing basketball. And I think my 4 year college career, I think he may have missed 4 home games. So there was just there was a high level of commitment to that. So I
Mm.
don't want to take away. At the same time, there was just a lot of abusive behavior. And so there was a codependency, I think, that all of us had in our relationship with my dad. And so when my wife and I were separated, so the affair came out in October. We went to my parents' house for Thanksgiving that year together, and I confessed to my family, my whole family, um, about my pornography addiction, about the
Mm.
sexual abuse, and just kind of confronted my mom about not believing me in that. And my dad blew it off, like with some snide comment. And it was at that moment, Elijah, that something went into my mind of something's not right with him.
Mm.
Like something's off. Well,
Hmm.
then that was in 2005. In 2009, it comes out that my dad's been unfaithful to my mom. He's had multiple affairs, prostitutes, all kinds of sexual addiction stuff. My parents go through a divorce. And it was through that process of trying to convince my dad to be a person of truth and to finally be honest about this hidden life, this double life that he'd been living for the last 36 years, that my mom confesses to me that he's not my biological dad. And so it was just this another kind of implosion of my identity that got blown up. Thankfully, I'm grateful to the Lord because I was in a place, we were 4 years into our restoration journey at that point, that I was in a place that I was strong enough and emotionally healthy enough to be able to process that to the best of my ability. But yeah, it was really just like I was a year I couldn't even brush my teeth in the bathroom
Mm.
because I would brush my teeth in the kitchen because I didn't want to have to look at myself in the mirror. just that shaking of my identity and just trying to understand who I am and why the two people that I trusted the most had deceived me, and not just them, but anybody that was older than me. Like there was this huge conspiracy to keep this secret from me. And so it took me a while to recover from that. Unfortunately, my dad passed away in 2019, maybe, and never really came back to the Lord. Never really had a restored relationship with anybody in my family, really. And so there's a lot that I felt like was lost in that. But yeah, so that's
No, that's huge.
Jerry Springer, if God rest his soul, if
That's how
he
I
still
tell
had a
people
show.
my that's my life.
Yeah.
It's I tell people I'm a Jerry Springer life. Actually, let me ask you another hard question. Because I think you mentioned something, and I want to know if this affected you at all. Did you walk through any? So you're in that restorative journey, right? And in that moment, you find out what your dad had been doing. And in some ways, Noah, you may have resonated with that because of your journey. Did you have to walk through any shame because of that? Was there any sort of connection in your mind that was like, oh my gosh, I did what he did, or I somehow, was how did you reconcile that in your mind?
Well, I definitely think shame has been one of the biggest obstacles. I think shame is one of the biggest obstacles to spiritual growth for everyone.
Agreed.
But I think it definitely was something that I had to process and walk through. Where I felt like my story with my dad, it actually made a lot of things make sense because I could look back at my childhood and like look at things like my parents would be in a fight and my dad would say, "Come and get your son." Well, I didn't really understand that at the time. You know what I mean? Like I just thought I was taking her side in the argument. And so I just felt like it was more of a dig at her, not necessarily an identifier of me. And so there was a lot that made sense. At the same time as well, there's an aspect of generational sin that unless it's identified and healed, it usually is repeated.
Agreed.
And so there was a lot of things that I felt like at that moment that I was grateful for because I had an opportunity when my kids were 9, 6, and 3, 4 years earlier, to make changes in my life and to bring things into the light that had been in the darkness for generations of my family that I was able to break. And it has not made us a perfect family. It's made us a more aware family. It's allowed us to have wisdom and discernment in ways that we didn't have before. And so, my 3 boys who are now adults, they've all struggled with pornography in their own way, but they didn't have to struggle in silence and isolation and secrecy. We built a relationship healthy enough to be able to have some of those conversations in an appropriate way. Right now, 2 of them are married, so they don't have those conversations necessarily with me or with us anymore. It's more with their wife and their own counselors. But yeah, so I think that really was more of the journey that I was on of like,
Wow.
okay, how can we make different choices?
What a healthy perspective.
Not just in our marriage, but obviously in our relationship with our kids, to have a different outcome.
I love that. And I will tell you, I'll raise my hand. I'm the first one to say, I did that wrong. For me, my son, we have the best relationship. I actually was just the best man in his wedding. But I haven't done everything right. I'll tell you that. And I just remember there was one time I was going through his phone, and knowing that pornography was something that I had struggled with, was going through his phone and I had found an image, and I immediately was like, "What's happening?" And I walk into his room with the image on his phone. I go, "What is this?" And he just, it was the worst thing I could have done. The worst. And it was it's something that we had to work through. And then I had to work with it. And to this day, he'll tell you like, "Dad, that was a traumatizing moment in my life."
Well, and I think what you were feeling was failure, personal failure, like I
Exactly.
failed. And what he received it as is, obviously shame of his failure. And that's what's so hard is sometimes the way that we talk to our kids is not even a reflection of what they've done. It's a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. And trying to discern that in the moment is so hard because we project the feeling that we have about ourselves onto their behavior, and it causes more damage than
That
rather
is
than just acknowledging it.
That's exactly what happened. That's so good. I know we just have a few minutes left here, but gosh, you're just a wealth of knowledge. I feel like I'm going to have you on again because people are going to want to hear more about you and your story. But they can connect with you. We'll get to that. But I want to talk real quick just about allowing your kids to see your imperfections.
Yeah,
How were you able, because your kids saw, I know they were young, but I'm sure the 9-year-old could see what's going on. But then as they're older, you have books, you have a ministry built around this. It has
yeah.
to be a conversation in your home. What
Hmm.
would you say is the importance, number one, of allowing your kids to see those imperfections? And number two, how did you model that reconciliation to them?
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. And I think one of the things that obviously got immediately destroyed when the affair came out was the image that I had built of myself publicly, right? So there was, 1,500 people got an email saying Justin's failed morally. He's not going to be a pastor of the church. So there was an immediate release from that persona that I had built. When it comes to our kids, I think one of the things that we struggle with as parents is fearing that they're going to know that we don't have it all together or that we don't have all the answers. And if they don't see me living a perfect life, then they're not going to love God or they're not going to, ascribe to the Christian faith like I do. And I think it's actually just the opposite. I think the way that we allow our kids to see their need for grace is to admit that we fail and that God's grace is enough for us. And so trying to be perfect actually does more damage to our kids and their perception of God than being a person who is saved by grace and reconciled by grace and walks in grace and needs grace. And so obviously the depth by which we admit failure to our kids needs to be age appropriate. It needs to be based on their maturity. We don't need to share all the details of our failure with our kids. But when my kids can see that I failed, I admit that failure, I repent of that failure, I seek forgiveness, and I'm given grace by God.
Mm.
It's a powerful demonstration of what it means to walk in a relationship with Christ. And that's the most authentic thing that our kids need. And so, I tell parents of young kids all the time, like the best gift you can give your kids is not to pretend that you're okay when you're not okay. It's to admit that you're not okay and then allow them to see the restoration, the healing, the redemption, the faithfulness of God on the other side of that.
Mm.
And that is really modeling for them an authentic Christian lifestyle.
Well, there it is there, folks. You heard it here, Justin Davis.
Hey, we've been to family therapy too, so we don't have all the answers, but I think after 29 years of parenting, the thing I'm most grateful for is, um, we have done our best to create a place that's safe. It's safe to succeed. It's safe to fail.
That, I mean, that right there is it. I couldn't have said it better. I'm so impressed with just your journey and where you're at, and I think it's absolutely incredible just to hear you speak from a place of humility. I think that the world needs humble fathers, needs fathers who are okay and able to admit their failures, able to admit their shortcomings, if you will. And I think there's such. I talked about it with a guest just last week. We think that strength comes in protecting and keeping things in and not letting things out. And the real strength comes in being able to communicate our struggles and being able to communicate our failures. As someone who was in law enforcement, A lot of that environment is hide, 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 keep it, keep it, keep it, strong, strong, strong. And there's just days you're not okay, and we just have to get ourselves to a place where it's okay to not be okay. But seeing God's redemptive and healing power in our lives is something that our kids need to know is available. And so I love what you said there. I will listen to this podcast probably 10 times after this, because you're talking to me. You're ministering to me. I mean, you may not be pastoring a church per se, but you know what? I'm not so sure that you're not. You're pastoring. Let me just put it that way. You definitely are pastoring. There's people that need to hear this, and so number one, I think you're a father worth following. So I think that people need to connect with you, connect with your social media, connect with your podcast, and I love the title of your podcast. Give that to me again. It's Get Real,
It's
right?
let's get real.
Let's get real. And I think when we get real, especially as men, I think we change things. We change things in our marriages. We change things in our families. We change things with our kids, the people around us. And the other thing I'll say, and I know this is true to you and it's true for us, and my wife and I actually just recently, a couple nights ago, we had a couple that wanted to get together with us. They're struggling. They wanted to hear about you. They needed some help. And I don't think we realize that our story is not just for us, that there are people that God will bring, and thousands of people for you that God has just brought to you that need to hear your story and need that hope of redemption. Would you
That's
agree with
right.
that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
A
I
couple
think
final,
that's
go ahead,
that's
go
the
ahead.
great thing about God is he finds us where we are, you
hmm
know?
I love that. I love a lot of people say, I'm chasing after God. I tell them, stop chasing and turn around.
That's right. That's right.
A couple final questions for you. I want to go over before we say good afternoon to you. But what's one thing that you wish more dads talked about?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think the one thing would be our need for one another. You know, a lot of times we pretend like we don't need friends, we don't need people in our lives. We're good on our own. But I think that sense of community is really important to talk about.
I love that. Let me ask you this: what's something that you're still learning?
Something I'm still learning. Well, I'm just a few weeks away from becoming a grandfather. And so our son and his wife are due with their first child. And so I'm still learning what this stage of life looks like.
Wow. So we just found out my son and daughter-in-law are pregnant too. I'm telling you what,
Okay.
Justin, we're both bald. We're both married. We've both got a lot of kids. I don't know. I might move to Indianapolis. I don't know.
There you go.
I don't think my kids will let me, but yeah.
Taxes are better than California. I'll tell you
Oh
that.
gosh, that's another podcast though. That's a whole nother one. But congratulations, I hear, and I'm
Thanks, you too.
excited to hear that being a grandfather is one of the best things in the world. So we're getting ready for that as well.
Absolutely.
And I want you to finish this as sentence. This last thing I'll ask you. So being a father has taught me.
Grace. You know, there's very few people in the world that you can fail miserably and have them still idolize you and want to be like you and want to be with you. And there's an unconditional aspect to being a father that I'm super grateful for.
Wow. Well, you heard it here. You heard it. You heard it here. Justin Davis. Justin, tell everybody just real quick where they can connect with you, where they can get your books,
Yeah.
where they can get that coaching that they so badly need. Throw that out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our books are on Amazon. You can just search my name on Amazon. It should come up. Anywhere books are sold, obviously, as well. And then you can find out more. We have some resources that you can download on justinandtrisha.com, TRISHA. Justinandtrisha.com is our website. And you can follow me on Instagram at justindavis33.
Love it. Justin, thank you so much for being here. If you want to connect with Justin Davis, he just told you how to do it. Get on there. I've been on there, as I admitted earlier. I will be ordering his books. I cannot wait to read them and hear more about his redemptive story. Thank you all for being here and listening. This is the Father's Podcast.